Hey everyone, and welcome back. A lot of us are looking for ways to make positive changes in our lives, but sometimes it feels like we're staring up at this impossible mountain of goals.
It can be totally overwhelming.
Right, like where do you even begin?
Exactly.
Well, today we're diving into a book called One Small Step Can Change Your Life
Mhm.
by Robert Maurer, and it turns out there's a philosophy for that, and it's called Kaizen.
Kaizen. It's a really interesting approach to change that actually originated in Japan.
So instead of those giant New Year's resolution style leaps that we try to make,
Right. Those never work.
never. This is about making these tiny, almost like ridiculously small changes.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that it's actually incredibly effective. And the cool thing is that it aligns with how our brains are actually wired.
So no more of those overwhelming to-do lists that make you want to just crawl into bed and hide.
Yeah, you don't want to trigger that fear response, right? Our brains, they kind of freak out a little bit when we try to make these sudden, massive shifts, but they're much better at handling those smaller, more manageable changes.
And Maurer really gets into this in the book. He even talks about how there are all these common myths about change that we've all kind of bought into that actually hold us back. Like we think change has to be hard and that bigger changes are going to equal bigger results.
And that Kaizen is too slow. We live in a world of instant gratification.
Exactly. So why are these myths so sticky? Why do we keep believing them?
Well, I think it's partly because, we see these dramatic transformations, right? We hear about these overnight success stories, and while those things can happen, they're not necessarily the norm.
They're definitely more exciting to see.
Right. But they don't usually tell the whole story. Often what looks like an overnight success is actually the result of years of, smaller, consistent effort behind the scenes. And those smaller steps can be incredibly powerful. Take the example of someone trying to lose weight, right? They go on this crash diet, they're miserable, they deprive themselves, they feel like they're missing out.
They give in to those cravings eventually, right?
Exactly, because they've gone from 0 to 100 overnight. Whereas with a Kaizen approach, you might start by just, swapping out soda for water once a day or adding an extra serving of vegetables to your dinner. And those small changes, they might seem insignificant at first, but over time they can lead to some pretty remarkable shifts in your lifestyle and your health.
Like the tortoise and the hare, right?
Yeah.
Slow and steady wins the race.
Exactly. It's the consistency over time that makes all the difference. And this ties back to the brain science we were talking about earlier. By taking these smaller steps, we actually bypass that fear response in the amygdala, which is that part of the brain that kind of throws up roadblocks when it senses danger. So we're essentially tricking our brains into embracing change by making it feel less threatening.
I love that. We're tricking our brains. And Maurer uses a great example in the book to illustrate this. He talks about this scenario where you have a desk that's just overflowing with paperwork, just completely cluttered. Instead of stressing yourself out by thinking, I've got to organize this whole entire desk, Kaizen would suggest you just pick up one single paperclip.
Just one. It sounds almost too easy, right?
Right? It's like that really is small.
But that's exactly the point. By taking an action that small that it almost feels insignificant, you don't trigger that fear response, that feeling of being overwhelmed, and that's what allows you to actually start making progress.
It's like you're just easing yourself into this new way of thinking and doing.
Precisely. It's about building momentum gradually.
And it's not just about, the actions, right? It's also about the way we talk to ourselves about those actions.
Right.
Maurer talks about the power of asking ourselves the right kinds of questions.
Yes. He calls them Kaizen questions.
Yeah.
And they're not these big, existential questions. It's not like, what is the meaning of life?
Right, not those deep self-help questions.
Yeah, it's more about asking these smaller, gentler questions, almost like you're nudging yourself in the right direction instead of interrogating yourself.
So instead of asking yourself something like, why am I such a procrastinator?
Right.
Which can make you feel even worse.
Totally.
You might try asking yourself something like, what's one tiny task, maybe just 5 minutes, that I could do right now to feel good, to get that feeling of accomplishment?
Exactly. And the book gives some great examples of these Kaizen question prompts. Like one that really resonated with me was, if my health was my top priority today, what's one small change I could make? Just one thing right now.
It's like these little mental shifts that can have a big impact.
Exactly. Because what happens is, by consistently asking yourself these smaller, more manageable questions, you start to rewire your brain, You're creating new neural pathways.
It's like you're training your brain to look for those small opportunities for improvement.
Precisely. And our brains are incredible at adapting and changing, even in subtle ways. And speaking of rewiring our brains, there's another concept in the book I wanted to touch on. Mind sculpture. Have you ever heard of that?
Mind sculpture. That sounds
That
intense.
sounds a little intimidating, right?
Yeah.
But it's actually pretty simple. It's basically the idea of using your imagination to practice a new skill or behavior. So, for example, let's say you have a big presentation coming up at work.
Okay.
With mind sculpture, you would spend a few minutes each day visualizing yourself giving that presentation,
So
seeing yourself feeling confident, delivering it flawlessly. And the idea is that by mentally rehearsing it this way,
you're kind of like tricking your brain into thinking you've already done it.
exactly, you're creating a mental blueprint for success, which then makes it easier to actually perform the task in real life.
So it's almost like athletes visualizing their winning performance before a game.
Precisely. It's the same concept.
That's really interesting. So we've talked about the importance of small steps, asking the right questions. Now we're talking about visualization. What about rewards? Because we all love a little pat on the back when we've done something good, right?
Absolutely. But here's the thing about rewards. When it comes to building lasting change, the book emphasizes those small, intrinsic rewards, and those can be even more powerful than those big external ones.
Intrinsic rewards. So you're talking about those good feelings you get from within.
Exactly. That sense of accomplishment you get from checking something off your to-do list, the joy of learning a new skill, the satisfaction of making progress toward a goal.
So it's more about finding joy in the journey itself rather than waiting for that big external validation at the end.
Exactly. It's about shifting your focus from "I'll be happy when"
Hmm.
to "I'm finding happiness in the process."
So we've been talking about those good vibes we get from those little wins, but is there such a thing as going overboard with big rewards, those external ones?
It's a good question. And yeah, the book actually addresses that. It says those big celebrations, they can be really motivating at first, for sure. But the problem is you can get too reliant on them. And then what happens when that big reward, it's just not there?
Or it's not as exciting as you thought it was going to be?
Exactly. You kind of lose steam. The motivation just fizzles out. So it's like using a sugar rush to run a marathon.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, you're going to burn out really quickly.
Exactly. You might have all this energy at first, but it's not going to last. So it's about finding that balance, allowing yourself to enjoy those small wins and those small celebrations along the way without becoming totally dependent on those external rewards.
Finding that internal satisfaction.
Exactly. Taking pride in the progress, however small it might seem at the time. And that leads us to, I think, the heart of what it really means to live this Kaizen lifestyle. It's not about reaching some destination.
It's about changing your mindset.
Yeah. It's about shifting that mindset from "I'll be happy when"
To I'm finding joy in the process.
yes. And let's be honest, life, it's messy, right?
Oh, yeah,
There are going to be bumps in the road.
for sure.
There are going to be times when things don't go according to plan. But this whole idea of Kaizen, it encourages us to look at those setbacks not as failures, but as opportunities to learn and grow from those experiences.
It's like that saying, you fall down 7 times, you get a bait.
Yes, exactly. It's about being resilient. So instead of letting those challenges completely derail you, ask yourself, okay, what can I learn from this? What's one tiny adjustment I can make to get myself back on track?
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Kaizen and one small step can change your life, we want to leave you with this. What's one small step that you can take today to move just a little bit closer to a goal that really matters to you? And remember, it doesn't have to be this huge, overwhelming thing. Maybe it's just 5 minutes of decluttering your desk. Or maybe it's finally booking that appointment that you've been putting off for weeks. Whatever it is, just remember, even the tiniest actions, when you do them consistently, they can lead to some really incredible positive change in your life. So go out there and make it happen.